Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to today's webinar on data privacy and security at Enterprise AI, a mission critical topic as large organizations accelerate their adoption of generative AI solutions. I'm Ashish Jhade and an automation architect at Accelerate. Today, we will explore how organizations can navigate the complex landscape of data security and privacy while implementing AI driven platforms. Joining me is our distinguished guest, Nischal Nadhamuni, co-founder and CTO of Klarity, a leading AI automation platform trusted by global enterprises. And Klarity is at the forefront of leveraging large language models to solve complex business problems at scale. In this session, we will review Clarity's approach to enterprise data privacy and security, how to evaluate security posture of GenAI vendors, mitigating LLM-specific threat vectors, safeguarding client data, encryption, access control, and data deletion, secure integration with systems and platforms, followed by a live QA. And feel free to post your questions in the chat throughout the session. Let's get started. So, data privacy and security are non-negotiable for organizations automating workflows involving sensitive contractual and financial documents. Clarity operates at high stakes environment when data governance is paramount. Hi, Nishil. Thank you for joining us. And I wanted to kick off with this question. And if you want, we can start with your introduction.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ashish. Thank you for having me. It's very nice to be here to see you all. To give some background about myself and Clarity, what we do is build generative AI products to help to automate back office operations. We've been in this business for more than 8 years, so we have the rare distinction of being one of the companies that was in AI before generative AI. We've been working in this space a very long time, built kind of a suite of AI products, kind of our two flagship products. One is called the Architect that can automatically build business documentation, whether that's PDDs, BRDs, SOPs, simply by watching a video like this one. So it's a first of its kind AI tool that is basically kind of a business analyst as a service or as a product. The second of our flagship products is what we call Automate, which is then able to take tedious high volume document workflows like invoice processing, revenue recognition, order to cash, high volume enterprise document workflows, and automate them by automatically reading these documents and turning them into structured data, and then going on to do things like matching them against each other to reduce the manual burden of working with documents. And so those are what our products do. We are used by many public and large private companies, including the likes of Zoom, Google, Bill.com, UiPath, Salesforce, 8x8, and many, many others. And so we're very, very familiar with the challenges of deploying AI at scale in production and really going beyond the POC phase, which is where I think a lot of folks are today and are spending a lot of time talking about today. Over the course of 8 years, we've raised multiple rounds, over $90 million from top tier Silicon Valley investors, and really built an incredible AI team. And so we have all the scar tissue and the ups and downs of building with AI, and very, very excited to share some of what we've learned from a data and security perspective in particular.
Yeah, that's awesome. And our partnership, Accelerate's partnership with Clarity has been phenomenal while we are using the Automate and the Architect, both products as well. So we have the accelerated discovery model where we were able to cut down the development and delivery time by around 40%, leveraging the Clarity as tool. And we are super excited to go over a lot more business use cases in future with Clarity. That brings us to the topic of data security and privacy, right? That's why we wanted to do this webinar to discuss and review those aspects. And I wanted to ask, as a leader in AI-powered document automation, how does Clarity approach data privacy and security? From a solutions architect standpoint, what core principles and mechanisms do you follow to ensure end-to-end protection of sensitive organizational data?
Absolutely. So I'll kind of answer this and many questions in two parts. So first is, how do we think about security as a standalone? And the second is, within the realm of generative AI, what do we need to do differently to be security first? So at a general level, the majority of customers that we serve are large public and large private companies, and we're dealing with incredibly sensitive data of theirs. And so security first has been a core principle of our organization right from the outset. We actually got our SOC 2 Type 2 very early in the company's life cycle. But it was very important to us not just to look at audits and security from a traditional perspective of just checking the box. And so with all of our controls, whether that's end-to-end encryption, whether that's secure development lifecycle, or anything else, segregation of data, we actually have proactive monitoring in place as well. Vanta is a system that we use that is actually proactively, continuously monitoring all of our systems, because it was very important to us that we don't just look at security as a check the box function, but really as something that is existential to our company. Because for us and many companies like us, and the customers that we serve, it is an absolute non-negotiable. So of course, we'll go into kind of more detail on the specifics, but kind of all of what we consider to be hygiene factors, whether that's end-to-end encryption, role-based access control, having the appropriate certifications, having individuals on the team with the appropriate background in terms of information security and data architecture has been very important for us. And of course, that's meant a much higher level of investment, and that takes a cost, but we think it's the right thing to do. From an AI specific perspective, again, we've been in this space for 8 years. And so we're very aware of some of the specific threats that AI poses. We'll, of course, talk more about that in a lot of detail. But our fundamental belief of AI as it when it comes to security is, first and foremost, protecting customer data and never training on customer data is a non-negotiable. And I think this should be the case with every company. Unfortunately, it's not. But I think it is a basic hygiene factor that no customer data should ever be used to train a model that is then used for any other customer. Of course, if a company is using a customer's data to train a model that is only used for that customer, that is okay, as long as that is made very clear and the customer has the ability to then delete that data. But often that's not what happens. Often companies take a much broader liberty to use your data to train models that are then used for others. And that's something that we took a very firm stance on early on. And frankly, it's much harder to build AI if you're not training any models. And this is why companies train models, right? Because you can deliver a better product, but it comes at the cost of compromising security. That was a very important, hard decision that we took right up front, that we are not going to use any customer data for training. And I'll also add that we don't use any derivative artifacts of customer data. And this is something that I would encourage all of you to talk to vendors about when you're engaging with them of, yes, maybe you don't use our data, but are you going to anonymize our data and use that? Because anonymization itself is an imperfect art. So it's important to validate that vendors are not using any derivative artifacts. And then finally, of course, when we're using these sophisticated AI systems, we want security end to end through the life cycle. So another one of our core principles has been we want to work closely not only with our own team, but any sub-processors and vendors that we are using to ensure that they are adhering to an equal, if not higher degree of security. So it's great that we are not training with your data, but we have to offer you the assurance that no one else that we work with is also training with your data. And that's something that we've done over a long period of time to work with our vendors, build those relationships of trust, get these guarantees in writing contractually. And then finally, we believe in giving customers complete control over their data. And that means, in our case, the ability for you to delete your data at any time. Of course, this makes it harder to build a product because most companies would prefer not to do it. But again, this to us, if we are security first, that means making compromises in the interests of security. So these are some of the main principles that we try to follow when it comes to security in generative AI.
That's awesome. Oftentimes, we face the challenge versus doing it in-house versus selecting a product. Of course, the products that are out there, such as Clarity, it comes with all the bells and whistles as a complete package. So, going back to your point, Nishal, like, can you give us some guidance or from your experience, what should be looking out when it comes to selecting Gen AI vendors?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk about this at a couple of layers. So I think Ashish, you touched on a very important point of how do you think about build versus buy when it comes to AI, and of course, mostly that's from a functionality perspective, a little bit from a security perspective, and then once you've decided, yes, I want to buy a vendor, then how do you perform the evaluation, both from a functional or business perspective, as well as from a security perspective. So I'll say that I think one of the best and worst things about generative AI is that it's very easy to experiment. It's a great thing because you can quickly do POCs, and that can be internally doing a POC or a vendor doing a POC. But the reason that it's not a good thing is going from POC to production grade reliability is actually very, very, very difficult. 99% of the work is in that part of the journey. And so one of the easy mistakes, and we've made this mistake ourselves in the early days of generative AI, is with any previous technology, if you can successfully deliver a POC, you would assume, okay, this looks like it has very good odds of success. With generative AI, I think there's an additional degree of caution that you need, that it is very easy to get anything to work on a limited data set. And I'm sure all of you have had this experience where on LinkedIn or elsewhere, you've seen these like incredible, fantastic demos that people have, but these things don't actually work in production. And so I'd say have that healthy skepticism. I mean, of course, we should be optimistic, we should try things, but also have that healthy skepticism, whether you're the one building it or whether you're evaluating a vendor, of like, is this actually production ready? And I think how that looks from a build versus buy is, you might hear from your own internal team that, yep, this is easily doable. Here's a little POC that I created in half a day that shows it. And I think it's worth double clicking and saying, hey, how much more work are we going to have to do to get this into production? And more often than not, what we find is the answer is it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work because there's variability issues, there's hallucination issues, stability issues, and then of course there's all of the non-functional requirements that are very important. We need SSO, we need RBAC, and so I think it's important to take a very sober, pragmatic look when you're making that build versus buy decision of how much work is there beneath the surface, to get this generative AI solution actually into production. Um, we actually heavily encourage people at our company to use AI solutions even in doing vendor evaluations. And now I would say the agentic AI solutions out there like OpenAI Deep Research, Microsoft Copilot, Perplexity Deep Research are actually very, very good. And so simply telling them, hey, we're thinking about buying a vendor in this area. We've done an internal proof of concept. Can you help guide me through this evaluation decision? Often we've seen brings out information that we would have otherwise missed. Okay, have you thought about it from this perspective? Have you thought about how integrations would take place? Have you thought about data residency? Whatever it may be. And so we heavily encourage our own team to use AI in doing the evaluation itself. So now let's assume that you've done a basic evaluation of build versus buy, and you've decided I want to go down the buy route. It makes sense for me. And generally, I strongly encourage companies to go down the buy route for anything that is not core to your business, or that is not a very large operational or cost center. Use AI to solve the big problems. AI is like any technology. To do things well, it takes a lot of time and effort. We are not yet at the point where you can ship things into production in 2 days, 3 days, and drive high ROI. So really pick the biggest problems. And if it's not the biggest problem for you, it's worth looking at it bringing a vendor. Let's say you've made the decision that, okay, we want to pursue vendors and we want to go the route of buying for a certain problem statement. The first thing that I would say is POC is a non-negotiable. Everybody in the market is going to have great videos of what they can do, and maybe it worked well on somebody else's data at somebody else's company, but because of the nature of this technology, it is it is fundamentally variable, right? It's almost more like a human being in a way, that just because somebody did a good job at another organization doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. And so I'd say be very conscious of, are you being sold to? and really push to do a POC. I know that vendors are not going to like this, and a lot of them will say, no, we don't offer POCs. Hey, take it or leave it. But really, really push them, because that is where the rubber meets the road. The devil is in the details. And this is why, for us building products, it's been very, very important that we offer our customers POCs. In fact, we made it mandatory. Our sales team cannot accept a deal without doing a POC, because we ourselves want to know that we can deliver what the customer is asking for. So ultimately, if we can't, sure, maybe we'll make a quick buck, but ultimately it's not going to be good for the customer or for us. Our reputation in the market really suffers, and that customer is not going to be successful. So I'd say try to push vendors to do that. And then when you do the POC, look for a representative set of your data. And there are two failure modes that I've seen here. The first is the POC is overly simple. Because it takes time to find data, but it's worth putting in the time. So when you're doing an evaluation across multiple vendors, say before you talk to any vendor, try to compile that data set internally. And often there'll be some constraints that you have. Obviously, you can't give vendors that you're evaluating the most sensitive data. So getting that representative data set, I think, is time consuming, but really, really valuable to do. Make sure that it's not too simple, but also make sure that it's not too complex. AI, like any technology, you can break it. If you really want to, you can break it. And ultimately, the goal is not to shoot down all the vendors by finding a data set that is so difficult. You really want a data set that is reflective of the problem statement, and try to make sure your data set is such that you could identify 70% and 80% success. Because another challenge I've seen folks falling into is they say, hey, it can't solve everything for me, therefore I don't want to use any AI. And ultimately, that's to our own detriment, right? We want to, if a solution is 80% good, it can drive 80% time savings, that's still typically a high ROI outcome in enterprise. And so make sure that the way that you're setting up the POC would allow you to recognize whether this is providing no value, sufficient value, or 95 to 100% value. Um, and then finally, of course, I would say from a security perspective, evaluating the vendor early on is really important. And I know that in traditional software, oftentimes we leave the security portion all the way to the end. I would strongly advocate of just having a very quick questionnaire or very quick conversation ahead of time with the vendor. Because I think we're living in the wild, wild west of AI right now, where we haven't yet, there are no certification standards for AI. We haven't established best practices throughout the industry. And so different vendors are doing things in very different ways. There are folks who are out there training on customer data and flouting all of the best practices. And something I've noticed is if the business user gets very, very far in the assessment of a vendor, it then puts, whoever is doing the assessment in a very, very difficult spot, because you're going to disappoint somebody in a big way. And I think the better way of approaching that is, can you have a very quick conversation, or can you even arm your business users to just ask some basic questions? Are you training with our data? Do we have control of our data? Are you SOC 2 Type 2 certified, or whatever the relevant certification is, PCI DSS, whatever it may be, just to make sure that there's some basic qualification, disqualification happening earlier in the life cycle. And then finally, what I would say is, if a vendor has made it through all of that, it is worth investing in an AI questionnaire. We serve a variety of very large public enterprises, and it's been surprising to me that there's a lot of variability in the level of rigor that is there around AI assessment, where I've seen some security teams being very proactive around AI questionnaires and others that are lagging a little bit behind. And I completely appreciate why, because the landscape itself, the threat landscape, is evolving so quickly. But I really think it's worth investing in building that AI questionnaire. And once again, I think generative AI can help you here. If you use a deep research from Perplexity, Copilot, what have you, and say, hey, here's some context about my company, could you help me create an AI questionnaire? What would be important to us? I think it's really worth making that investment ahead of time, and it'll really pay dividends with every single vendor that you bring on board.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great point, Nishal. And as you mentioned, the devil is in the details, right? The 99% of the work happens after the post POC. And in that context, we hear the terms like prompt injection, the data leakage, or hallucinations all these things are found after the fact that a POC may be successful. Can you talk us a little bit more about these unique security challenges that we possess and how Clarity is mitigating those risks?
Yes, absolutely. And so yeah, I think like Ashish mentioned, generative AI actually brings with it many unique risks that
Mhm.
frankly did not exist before. And I'll just kind of mention a few of these, and then I think what I believe is the right way to approach and handle these risks. Um, so, I think there's functional and security risks, and for those of you that are on the security parts of your organization, I think it would be important to be aware of both. I know that traditionally the role of a security team is looking at things more from a security and compliance perspective, but what I found is because generative AI is so new, it is often there are functional risks that we might be missing that are almost universal to all AI solutions. So I'll just kind of go through a few of these. And I do think there's a question, the ability for all of you to ask questions. So please, at any point, feel free to post a question. I'd be more than happy to answer it. So prompt injection is definitely one. And more broadly, I'd say look at the mode in which the user can add input into the system. So, and if the beauty of generative AI is it can take an unstructured input, right, which traditional software could not do. Traditional software had to be a structured input. The beauty of generative AI is it can be unstructured. That means that you can give it an image as input, you can give it text, you can give it voice as input, but with that comes a risk that like with SQL injection, there can be prompt injection. And so we want to make sure that there's adequate validation happening via middleware in the system to make sure that prompt injection is being mitigated. We also want there to be a basic um, input validation to make sure that if there's any inappropriate data being uploaded, that is being caught as well. The reason this is bad is obviously you do not want yours or a vendor's system to be allowing in any kind of inappropriate or malicious content. And this is actually a very easy way to bring down an AI system, especially if they're using cloud-based AI vendors like OpenAI, Anthropic, because these providers will actually rate limit and even block any user or enterprise API account that is seen to be uploading malicious content. And so you'll want to make sure that that protection is in place as well. The other I'd say is data leakage. That depending on how a prompt and a system are built, you can actually you can actually cause a data leakage in one of a variety of different ways. So of course, one would be through prompt injection and by simply kind of asking the system to reveal its data. But another is in how the data itself is being stored. It would be important. I mean, I think there's general hygiene factors that you should look out for. Role-based access control, encryption, but I think there's some generative AI specific ones to look out for. Is the data being retained? And so a lot of companies will tell you, hey, we're not training with your data and end the conversation there, but you should push a little bit further. Where is our data being retained? And do any of the model providers have access to our data? Because these companies are moving at such a high velocity, of course there will be data breaches. It happens to any company. And the more unique vendors and locations that hold your data, the higher the risk and the higher the surface area of attack. And so something that we did is we kind of painstakingly negotiated zero data retention agreements with our core AI subprocessors. This is not something that happens by default, but I think it's really worth asking your vendors about this, of where is data stored from an AI provider perspective. The next set of risks I'll mention is from an output perspective. So we talked about from an input perspective, how is data entering into the system? From an output perspective, though, again, generative AI, the beauty of it is that it can generate almost any kind of output, right? That can be a text output in any form. It can create images. It can create videos. It can, but with that comes a lot of unique risks. I think the number one thing to look at is, can this AI take actions on its own? And can it produce a potentially harmful output? Um, the first, can this AI take actions on its own? This is a double-edged sword, right? Because as agentic AI starts to develop, we want AI to take some actions on its own. We want it to help be assistive to human beings, to take some of the work off of our plate. But we need to be really careful with what kind of actions it's taking. And again, the devil is in the details here, because Let's take an example. Let's say there's a generative AI solution that's doing a Salesforce to ERP integration, and it's automatically writing data into the ERP. We want to be very careful about how that's being done. Um, is the generative AI automatically making decisions about which object to write to? Is there any layer of validation that's in place? Or is the generative AI simply building the recipe up front, but a human is looking at it? So, really kind of look at what level of agency is being given to the AI system to autonomously take actions downstream. Is there a human in the loop? And often you really do want a human in the loop if AI is autonomously taking or recommending actions downstream. Second, I would say, can the AI generate a malicious or an inappropriate output? And this kind of relates back to the input that's being generated. And there are two ways that we typically look at this. First, how is the output being consumed? Is a user consuming their own output? In which case, the blast radius is really contained. Let's say, for example, it's a chat system. I'm entering a prompt. I'm getting a response. That doesn't mean that the risk is zero, but the risk is limited, right? Because I am the one who's entering in any input and I'm getting the response. So the blast radius is a user radius of one. Or do we have an AI system that is publishing data into a critical enterprise system like ERP, like CRM? Is it posting on the company's behalf? Is it sending out calendar invites? Now the blast radius is much larger. And so, really think about what could happen if things were to go wrong with the system. If an inappropriate output was generated, what set of users could that be generated for? And what could be the downstream negative impact of that? The next risk that I'll mention is more of a business or a functional risk, but I think it's really, really important to be mindful of, which is lack of reliability. And sometimes this is called hallucinations. But even if we say that it's not a hallucination, what are the cases where the LLM might give you different responses in a way that is detrimental to your organization? Many times there are multiple right answers to the same question, and that's fine. The same way we would not penalize a human for giving different right answers, we should not penalize an LLM. But what we've seen is in many cases, and this is one of the core differences between a POC grade application and a production grade application, how are they handling the reliability of LLMs? LLMs are fundamentally non-deterministic technologies. It is virtually impossible to get a large language model to give you the exact same answer again and again. There are different ways of mitigating and handling this. It's not an unsolved problem, whether it's k-shot prompting, whether it's fine-tuning, whether it's structured output validation. But this is definitely a question that you want to be asking, and it is definitely a risk that is unique to more unique to LLMs than to traditional software. The next risk that I'll mention is the risk of data poisoning and positive exhaust. Often, it sounds very good to say, hey, the AI will learn from you. And you might hear many vendors say this, right? That as you interact with the software, it's going to get smarter and smarter, and it'll just learn from you over time. And while this sounds good in theory, you want to be very, very, very careful with these kinds of closed loop solutions, especially if you have many business users interacting with this, uh, because it's very easy for AI to learn the wrong thing. And unlearning is also a very difficult problem. Let's say there's 2,000 user interactions, 1,500 of them are good, 500 of them are bad. Finding those 500 bad interactions and removing them from the data corpus, whether that's model training or fine tuning or prompting or whatever, but removing that influence, that data influence, is very hard to do. So watch out for these closed loops where the model is automatically, I'll use learning in air quotes to mean being influenced in any way by data. The last couple that I've mentioned, that I'll mention here, are um, one around certifications and the second around benchmarks. These are kind of related to each other, but a little bit different. Existing certification standards that we have today, like SOC 2, like SOC 1, like PCI DSS, ISO, these are built for a pre-generative AI world. Now, there's a lot of good work that's being done to modify these for generative AI, but really try to dig into the reports that are being given by the company and try to ask them how their certification program has been tuned for AI. It is very hard. I mean, I would say today, auditors are kind of trying to come up to speed with everything that's happening in AI. but they're frankly not completely up to speed yet because the landscape is evolving so quickly. So you really want to know that the vendor that you're working with is proactive about how they think about certifications. For example, we proactively go to our auditors and we give them new sets of risks that we believe our system that are relevant to our system because of the way that we're using AI. So you want to know that the company that you're working with is thinking about certifications from a truly proactive perspective and not just in terms of checking the box, and that the certifications that they are publicizing are the right certifications and that actually cover the way that you're going to be using the system. And I'd say again, because of the nature of AI, this will require a little bit more time spent on behalf of the person that's doing the evaluation than previously you would have. And the last one that I'll mention is benchmarks. That because of how generative AI works, which is that it's a lot like a human being, it can do almost anything. Finding the right benchmark is actually very, very difficult. And so you'll see there's all kinds of benchmarks out there. And anybody who publishes a model or that publishes their system will always do very well. It'll always get like a 90 or a 95%. What you should try to dig into is how is this benchmark measured and is it actually going to be applicable to how I'm using the system? And it's hard to do, but it's worth doing. And anytime there's a new model, this is what our team does is they go, okay, well, you're telling me this is 95% on this benchmark. What is this benchmark? What questions did you ask? Is it relevant to me? And very often the answer is no, it's not relevant to me. And that's okay. But that means you have to do your own evaluation. And so that I'd say is another kind of risk, both from a functional and a security perspective. Whatever metric or certification that's being publicized, is it relevant and applicable to you, or do you have to do your own evaluation?
That's awesome. Nischal, all the conversations, the good conversations that we are having, they often start with the question of how my data is being handled, right? So can you talk us about Clarity, how the customer data is being handled in the Clarity platform, and what policies that you have to ensure and mitigate risks with the data security?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll kind of answer this in two parts. One is security from a traditional software perspective. And then second is security more specifically from a generative AI perspective. So from a traditional software perspective, I think there are a set of best practices that you would want companies to follow, and we very much do, and care about investing in this. The biggest of that is being SOC 2 Type 2 compliant, and that includes a whole bunch of controls within it. That includes end-to-end encryption. It includes having a secure development lifecycle. It includes having disaster response and business recovery and continuity. It includes data management policies. It includes role-based access control. And so all of that are things that we invested in very early at the company's outset. And again, it was very important to us that instead of just looking at certification and compliance as a check the box, how can we do it in a proactive fashion? And how can we do it in as automated of a way as possible? And the reason I say automated is not to save costs, although that is of course important, but it's more about how can we have continuous monitoring of all of our systems and tools. So the way that Clarity's compliance works today and InfoSec posture is we have proactive monitoring at multiple levels. It's done at the cloud level. So there are AWS agents that are proactively monitoring, for example, our containers, our patch management. And then we have a system called Vanta that looks at multiple systems holistically. For example, our database, of course, our cloud provider, AWS, and many more, and looks at are any policies being violated. For example, if a single S3 bucket encryption were to be turned off, first of all, that is blocked at the human policy level, so engineers know that they should not. But if for some reason it were to happen, immediately a notification is sent off. And so this principle of having multiple layers of redundancy and having proactive monitoring happening was something that was very, very important to us, because we know that, and this happens to all companies, as you grow, if you only have traditional human policy-based controls, it is inevitable that sooner or later you're going to have a breach. The more we can automate these controls and make them proactive, and yes, that includes work, it includes investment, it includes hiring the right people ahead of time, which is expensive. but we believe it's the right thing to do, and it really pays dividends over time in terms of the amount of time you save and in terms of the results for your customers of not having security incidents and data breaches. So that I'd say is from a traditional software perspective. From a generative AI perspective, there's a few principles that we follow that I think are more unique to generative AI. The first, we talked about this up front, is a really, really firm stance on not training with any customer data. And this includes us not training. It includes any sub-processor that we use not training. And it includes not using any derivative artifacts of that customer data, not anonymizing it. The problem is that these derivative artifacts, often it is impossible to fully scrub data from an artifact. And so in the process of anonymizing it, some data remnants will get left behind. And so you end up with this trail of risk and potentially sensitive data being compromised. And so that's kind of the first pillar of our generative AI posture, not having any training happening by us, by our sub-processors, period, full stop. The second is giving customers control over their data and the ability to delete that data at any point in time. Again, this is hard from an architecture perspective because as you build, for example, dashboards, derivative artifacts, to benefit the customer, giving the customer the ability to delete at any point kind of undermines some of that. But again, we think it's so important that the customer has complete control over their data. The third that I'd say is, we talked about a lot of these generative AI specific risks, things like prompt injection on the input side, output validation, users inputting malicious data, systems that are taking actions downstream. We actually red team test all of these features extensively. What red team test basically means is we have a set of people, humans at our company, whose job it is to try to break these features before we put them out into the world. This is something that the top AI labs do as well. For example, I know at OpenAI and Google, they will spend months testing a feature before they send it out. It's very expensive to do, but it's the right thing to do. Because these technologies are so new, there's not yet automated ways to test all of the corner cases. And therefore, we think the responsibility should be ours to do some of this manually, even though it's time consuming. I'd say the fourth principle is minimizing kind of the data footprint of the applications that we build. Yes, it's great to have agentic AI applications that can go touch all of your systems, and maybe in the future we will, but it's really important for us that we can prove value to our customers with minimal data interaction and minimal interaction with their existing systems, because that gives them peace of mind, and we want to be able to prove value before asking for a large investment of IT resources on their side, security reviews on their side. And so it's really important to us that our customers can get very, very quick value, and that we can do that without necessarily sending data downstream to systems. And kind of related to this is the principle that we do not want AI today to make decisions about what it's going to read from systems and what it's going to write to systems. So anytime where we have AI interacting with a system upstream or downstream, it is very, very, very tightly controlled, and we do not allow it to make autonomous decisions to say, hey, I want to go read the Salesforce account. Now I want to read the opportunity. Now I want to run a query to read, all of the accounts and opportunities. We never introduce paradigms like that. And yes, there is some loss of functionality, but the addition of security and reliability to us is much more important. So those are some of the principles that are really important to us. And the last thing I'd say is we are very proactive about constantly looking for new threat vectors and new patterns that we need to be looking out for. I'll give you an example. MCP is a new paradigm within AI. And it kind of relates to how models can integrate with different systems. It's a unified protocol for AI to be able to integrate with a variety of different systems. It stands for Model Context Protocol. And so this is very, very powerful. It basically means that you don't have to go and build connectors for your AI to every source system. But we're currently looking at what are the unique risks posed by MCP. If we were to implement MCP, what mitigations do we need to have in place? So I think, again, because this field is evolving very quickly, we believe that the burden should be on us and on other companies to do your own thinking as the certification standards evolve. It's not enough to say, hey, I'll follow the certification standards. I think companies need to be more proactive in looking at this themselves from a first principles perspective.
Yeah, that's awesome. Think we are right on time. I want to thank you all for joining us, and a special thanks to Nischal for sharing how Clarity is tackling the privacy and security at scale. And initially, your thoughts are super valuable for us, and it paints a good picture on what to look at when we are working with building a tool or buying a tool. As we have heard today, the deploying generative AI enterprise requires more than innovation. It requires strong foundation of trust, governance, and security design. Clarity's approach provides a practical blueprint for enterprise-grade AI deployments. If there is one core message to leave you with, security and privacy aren't optional, they are foundational. We'll send out a session recording and takeaways shortly. If you have additional questions and would like to connect with Clarity, please reach out to Clarity.ai. Visit Clarity.ai. On behalf of our team, thank you again for your time and participation, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event.
Thank you all. Thanks, Ashish, for having me.
Absolutely.